tell me about the earliest stories that you've heard about the mining? How did it start in this area?
All right. Actually, my grandmother told me different things. Zinkville used to be quite a big little town, and when they'd go down there, she said sometimes if it had rained or whatever, that they'd get out and there would be a reddish-like seepage coming up out of the ground, and that must have been the minerals that were in the mineral area of those that had mines and so forth. But actually, I heard more from my husband, Charlie. He worked in the mines when he was 14 during the summer, and he worked in quite a few of them. I had a picture of him, and he is on the wagon cart taking and hauling underground, and the mules were pulling. And he'd tell me how sorry he felt for these animals, because after they worked them so long, they'd take them out of the mines and they would be blind. And his dad, he was guard at night over a lot of the mines. He only had one arm, and it was amputated in a drill rig accident. But we would drive down there, old memory things. He knew every mine there was. My Charlie did. And he would name them all. Most of them had been leased, and because they couldn't sell their mines until the year 24. So we'd go around, and some of them I remember. And my uncle, Abraham V, had a large amount of minerals on his original allotment, and so did my grandmother. Now, Uncle Abe had 9 mines that were being leased out and 2 tailing piles, and I have a list of that at home. Some of them I know that were leased, and these mining companies would come in from Commerce and around this area and lease them. The thing of it is, they were not leasing them to him because of the fact that his wife, ex-wife, I guess, well, she wasn't ex yet, but she had put a hit out on him, and everyone liked Uncle Abe, and so that didn't work out. So she had an attorney in the city of Baxter to write up a document that he was deceased. She therefore went and got her brother to be the guardian of their son, who was a will. I have a copy of all this documents. And so her brother was guardian over their son, Paul Damon. All right. So she started leasing, but Uncle Abe didn't know about this. And he would walk down to the BIA and say, "Where's my money? Where's my leases?" "Well, you're under such and such a guardian of this and that. You'll be getting your money tomorrow or the next day. And why don't you come back then?" But he never did get his money. And he did not know this was going on, of course. And the BIA was in on it too. That's been 100 years ago, probably. But some of them were guilty. Not all of them in the BIA, but they were taking kickbacks. So they knew about it. They knew about the guardians. He had a lot of guardians at one time. And they'd take him for about 2 years, get millions of dollars, on these mines. leases. And all this was happening. And my poor grandmother, she had a white man that leased from her for grazing. And he, when he found out she had minerals on her land, he started bringing in mining equipment. And she told him, get your mining equipment off of my land. You leased it for grazing cattle, and not for mines. And she took him to the Supreme Court in Kansas because her lawyer told her, move your family over into Kansas for safety, because he tried to burn her out twice, and her family. And she won. Then his son became a lawyer, appealed the case, and forged and frauded her name, and they got it. They got every penny she had, all of her mines, everything. Well, that was that. She was penniless. So Uncle Abe, he thought, that's terrible. So he wrote a letter to Eleanor Roosevelt. And he told her just exactly what was happening to him. And I knew all this to be true because they asked me to go to federal court in 2019 and testify. And I said I would. And they had the same documents, copies, and so forth I had. And then the other lawyer, we were assigned to different lawyers, and this one come in, and I'll never forget, he said, I've looked yours over too. And he said, Charlene, he said, you should write a book on this. He said, this was terrible. And so Eleanor, she sent down investigators, and they got them. And on his leases in the mining area. And like I say, he had 9 mines that were leased to different other companies out of Commerce, Miami, and I have the name of them at home, documentation. And he said my lawyer said he did not only write 1 letter to Eleanor, but 2. And he said, do you want to read them? He had copies. And I said, oh yeah, I want to read them. And so I read them, and he said, here, you can have them. You can have them, and you can have some of these documents, And I said, oh, that's wonderful. And before we got out of, this was when we were getting ready for our federal court hearing in Miami. We were supposed to go to Washington, D.C., but the attorney up there that was assigned to help us, and the judge, decided they'd come down here. And they stayed at Downstream, and we held the court in the Miami courthouse. And we could not go into the trial until we had testified. After we were testified, then we could go in and listen to the others, that were called to testify. It was all very interesting because the one from D.C., she kind of took over, but she was an attorney. Her husband was the attorney, and he was blind. And we had, I think, 5 meetings before we ever went to the actual trial of the federal court hearing. It was all very interesting, very interesting. And so Uncle Abe, he come out all right. the last guardian he had lived in Baxter, and he was getting older, but he had taken so much and millions of dollars from Uncle Abe, and they got those that were taking kickbacks, other attorneys, I won't mention names, also those in the BIA, not all of them were in on it, and they got them, and but now his guardian at that time was getting older, so they didn't they pressed charges against him, but they didn't put him in prison or anything like that. And but he had to buy Uncle Abe a home, give him money to live on each month. Uncle Abe was so happy. It was a small home. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ideal for him. And anyway, he found out all about this and about the hits that were put out on him later, and his ex-wife, I guess she was still married to him, I don't know, she was with another man for so long, but she passed away during the Depression years in the 30s. And then his son, too, was involved. And so they took that away from him and made my mother his, she was to be his heir and take care of his, help him, sort of like a power of attorney, I guess you might call it. But she helped him. She never took any money, but he left her a will that everything, all his assets and what he had left would go to her. And then after all this happened, he was accidentally struck by a car and fatally injured and died. So Mama, she had his mines out there. She tried her best to sell them because it was after, the year 24. But they were kind of dwindling down at that time because it was in the 40s. And she couldn't sell them, but squatters got on them. These squatters would come along and they'd say, well, who does that land belong to? Oh, some old Indian. They don't use it. They don't know anything about it. Well, let's settle here. And so they settled there and took over. Then my mom, she passed away in 79 from pneumonia, and she was left everything to me. I was her only child. But I was left out of the Good Eagle case. I didn't go to any of those meetings. I should have, but I didn't. I wasn't greedy. I thought it's all over with. People went that didn't even, we were told by our main attorney, and he told me that this Good Eagle case was to be for those with original allotments that had leases, minerals, townhouses, what have you, on their allotment. And I'd go to every meeting, and I'd talk to him, and he'd say, now don't you worry, everything's going to be all right. And he'd pat me on the shoulder. And, but anyway, but it didn't turn out that way. It didn't turn out all right. anyway, my husband knew every mine there was, and we'd drive down there around Zinkville, Pitcher, Hawkerville, Carden, all around, and he'd tell me the different names of the mines and those that he had worked in. And he even took me down in one mine where there was a tailing pile on one side of the road, and the mine was across the road highway on the other side. It was real large. And we went down in a barrel. His dad led us down in a barrel, and I saw how huge it was. And so Charlie, my husband, he knew all about these mines. He knew the names, who they were leased from who, different people, in mining from other companies. Now there was one, I have a picture of one mine. They didn't change the name, and it was called O-Abe, and that was after Uncle Abe, and they left his name on there. But so this is how the mining area was. It was so rich in minerals, and a lot of people that had these minerals did not realize that they were being taken by different attorneys, guardians, and what have you. They would receive some, and they lived off of that. But my grandmother was smart enough to realize things weren't right, and Uncle Abe was smart enough to realize that things were not right. So there are those 2 letters, and I tried to get them back because when I was leaving downstream from one of our meetings before we held the final trial in Miami, here comes my lawyer running after me, hollering my name, and I was about to go out the door. He said, Charlene, this attorney in D.C. wants all those things I give you back. And I said, oh? I said, well, what for? He said, I don't know, but she wants them back. Well, she wasn't an attorney. Her husband was the attorney, but she was a spokesperson. And so I had to give them back to him. And I tried to get them back after that, but it failed. I called him so much, and he said, well, you've got a letter that confirms all this. I said, that may be, but I said, I wanted those letters and some of those documents. And so I stopped calling him. I just let it go. But the other attorney, he was real nice. And I talked to him about 2 months ago. And he told me, he said, he's no longer with us. But he said he's with another firm. He gave me his address, telephone number, and everything. But I didn't call him. And he understood. He thought it was himself. He thought it was terrible the way my uncle and my mother were treated. And how I was treated, of course. I don't know how it was dispersed. I have no idea. I can't imagine. But the minerals were really, a lot of them, tailing piles. My goodness, it lasted a long time in the mining area. And of course my husband knew all the mines and would tell me the name of this one, the name of that one, and he even remembered some of the companies out of Commerce and Miami, and I don't know where else, that leased them, And so this is what happened in the mining area. It was sad situation for some people. I don't understand why it happened like it did. But I know that Zinkville at one time was a thriving town, and a friend of mine had a large picture of all the school children. There were about 300 pupils there, and she was so proud of it. And that's how big the town was. And my Aunt Minnie was also born in time to be an original allotee, and she had a mine, and then she had allotment. She was an original allotee. She was born just in time to get the allotment, and a cousin of hers. And while most of her land was over by downstream, where the spook light is, and I have a copy of that from the BIA. I went to every courthouse. I went to the Columbus courthouse. I got documents, copies made of my grandmother's trial. I went to Miami courthouse. I went to the BIA and the only reason I think I got in was I told them I was doing my genealogy, which I was, of course. And they were very nice. The director at that time was a lady. And so I got a lot of information during all this time. Even when they come over here, there were 5 families that come over on the East Coast and went up to Canada and formed a town called Little France. And when they headed down this way, down through Ohio and so forth, and met with the O-Gah-Pahs. So I have all of those documents. I have so many, it would fill a room. Actually, totes and totes. And I try to go through them once in a while, but I have some laid out now. And it's amazing what all went on during the mining era time. Of course, all this happened after I was born. I was born in 29, and grandmother, I lived with her, and she would tell me all these things and what happened, and she would have boxes she'd give me to take home, and she had a trunk, and she said, now this is yours. But I didn't get the trunk. Someone else in the family got the trunk first. And there were a lot of pictures, but I did get some because she would give me a box at a time. And she would explain about the mines and how during that time when they were leasing to this veterinarian up in Kansas, and he was putting his cattle on there for grazing. And they put them out on a desolate area, where a meadow where they had good grazing and hay. And that's what she leased on. But she didn't lease lease anything to him for any minerals, not at all. He tried to steal them, and he got by with it. I have copies of that too. I have maps. She gave me a few. And then I went to the Joplin Museum later on after I was married. I stayed with my grandmother until I was married. My mother remarried and my father remarried. And by going to the Joplin Museum, they had all these mining articles, and they had Tiff, Jack, I don't know what all. And it was really really interesting. And then finally they give up their museum and sent it to the, at that time, most of it they sent to the college there at Joplin. It was the Joplin Junior College. And I went over there, and after I was married, and they made me a bunch of copies of maps also. So I have a lot of copies of the mines, the areas, the range lines, their names are on them, and grandmother, and they all got 2 allotments. One of hers is with Slim Jim. He got one too, up by downstream, but Squatters got it too. So, and then hers and Aunt Minnie's was on the Spooklight Road. Squatters got it too. And so that's what happened to these people that lost their mines, their leases, their everything. But Uncle Abe come out all right by notifying the President of the United States' wife. She sent down investigators, and they got him for his part. And it's so sad he passed away in a year's time from being struck by a car.